Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving prime minister and the man who has dominated the political scene there for much of the past 3 decades, he's survived to fight another day because on Thursday he overcame a mini revolt within his own Likud party to see off a leadership challenge from Gideon Saar. Mr. Netanyahu's margin of victory was a comfortable 72% to 28%, and this was Mr. Netanyahu's response. You'll hear him in Hebrew early on Friday to his victory.
עכשיו הזמן להתאחד כדי להביא ניצחון סוחף לליכוד ולימין בבחירות לכנסת. רוב העם תומך בימין ורוב העם תומך בי.
His message now is the time to unite and a tremendous victory for Likud and the right in the March general election. So those were his words. He went on to say most of the people support the right and support me to lead the government. Of course, there have been 2 elections which were inconclusive in recent months in Israel. On the line from Tel Aviv is Tal Schneider, diplomatic and political correspondent for the Globe's business newspaper. Tal, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So he wins within his party. What difference does that make, do you think, in the wider country?
Well, he wanted to have a definite win within his party in order to show the general public that he doesn't have any opposition inside his own home. Having said that, everybody knew that his party base is very, very strong behind him. The general public in Israel is hesitant in voting him again, as you just mentioned. 2 times in 2019, he lost the general election. He's unable to form a government, and he is now sitting as an interim prime minister with 3 indictments. That's a severe, situation. Never in the history of Israel we had a prime minister who was unwilling to step down because of 3 indictments. He wants to have at least 61, which is the majority of the seats of the Israeli parliament in March, actually, in order to claim immunity. It's very troubling for the Israeli people to grant a prime minister an immunity. So I think he's having a tough election, even though he managed to get, a very good result. If he had a less than result, let's say 60-40 or even 45 to 55, then the general public would say, now we see that he is not strong enough within his own party. That way, with that, such a huge margin, the landslide of his own party, he is claiming the Israeli public loves him just because, we just saw the Likud public loves him. It's not the same, though.
No, the indictment you refer to, these are 3 corruption charges that he currently faces. And my understanding is that the Supreme Court has got to hear whether or not a prime minister who's been indicted can form a government. And there's still a question mark over that, isn't there?
There is a question mark about that, but in Israel, the Supreme Court may be hesitant to, shove his hands into the political process. It's very complicated. I do not expect the Supreme Court to really go ahead and give a full verdict on that. They might say, it's for the public to decide on March and not our own, judicial panel. So even though they're taking the case to discuss whether or not they can discuss it, it's still far away from them getting involved into that.
Brief thoughts in the studio, and then I'll come back to you, Tal. Lali, this is a remarkable political survivor.
Well, he is a Teflon prime minister, but in part it is also, he's managed to survive because he's the best reflection of the politics, not only in Israel itself, but also outside of Israel. So the rise of a very populist right wing who trades on violence. And the interesting thing about Netanyahu is that, of course, the kinds of disagreements that are happening and the polarization in Israel around him actually have nothing to do with Palestinians. The entire political spectrum in Israel has actually got more or less the same position on Palestinians, which is to keep them under the heel of the boot. And so this comes out as a really interesting moment as whether or not Jewish Israeli citizens are quite happy with having a president and his indictment sitting on it, just because he seems to be quite popular in the right-wing circles internationally. Globally, he seems to be quite popular in those circles.
Gareth, quick thought, then I'll go back to Tal.
Yeah, so he's so confident that he can he's innocent, but he won't face the charges. Is that what we're saying?
Well, he's hoping that he gets immunity, and I think
but what I mean is, if he was innocent, surely he would say, bring it on, I'll face the indictments.
But I think in Israel, people have known that he and his wife have taken advantage of the political position they've had to garner all sorts of benefits. And of course, there's this huge cronyism charges,
So,
etc. So yeah.
Another gangster in charge of another
absolutely.
country.
Yeah.
Tal Schneider, a word on the electorate more broadly, because we've talked about the previous elections, the fact that they were inconclusive. There is the figure of Benny Gantz, the former Army Chief of Staff, who leads the opposition Blue and White Party. How much difference is there for Israelis to choose from here, realistically?
It's really like the opposite persona. Benny Gantz is a very calm and moderate and you may say gentleman-like. He would never speak against the Arabs the way the Israeli Prime Minister now speaks against Arabs. And I'm not talking about just the Palestinians in the territories. I'm talking about Israeli citizens. We do have 20% population who are Muslims. And Netanyahu has campaigned against them in a very racist manner. This thing did not work on September when the Israeli population did not like the way the prime minister talks against them. So if you take Gantz, he is the opposite, influence. He's very mellow, soft-spoken. He would not speak against the prime minister in a severe manner. He only talks about his corruption charges. So he tries to get the campaign to be very, like we used to remember campaigns, more calm and not harsh discourse.
Okay.
Whereas Netanyahu actually is moving to the other direction, and people are saying maybe he will take a lesson right now and try to change his manners in a way, because he lost, the two last cycles. It did not work for him to be this kind of hyper racist campaigner.
We will no doubt reflect on where that takes us in the coming weeks as well. Tel Aviv, Tal Schneider, diplomatic and political correspondent for the Globe's business newspaper, with her take on that win within Likud for Benjamin Netanyahu. It's 6:44 GMT.